Hey everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. If you're in flooring sales, design, customer service, whatever it is, chances are you're dealing with LVT on a daily basis.
You're absolutely right. LVT is everywhere these days.
Yeah, it really is. And for good reason.
hmm
But today we're going deep on LVT so you can really own it,
Yeah,
own those sales conversations, nail those designs, and become a troubleshooting master.
exactly. We're going way beyond the basics here.
All right, so let's jump right in. LVT, luxury vinyl tile, it's like everywhere you look. But why?
Mm.
Why the sudden surge in popularity? We've got tile, hardwood, carpet, all those other options. What's making LVT the star of the show?
Well, a big part of it, I think, is the versatility. You get the look of those high-end materials, hardwood, stone, but without the price tag. And
Ah,
the durability is incredible.
right. You can tell customers it's going to last them 10, 20 years easily.
Absolutely. You compare that to something like hardwood, which needs constant care and attention. Even then, it might only last 10 years if you're lucky.
So we're talking potentially outlasting hardwood, and it's way easier on the wallet.
Okay, I'm starting to see the appeal.
And on top of all that, it's so easy to install,
Yeah.
especially with those click lock systems. So DIY friendly saves people a ton on installation.
Which is huge, yeah. Now, speaking of installation, let's clear up some terms real quick because people get these mixed up all the time. LVT and LVP.
Right. So LVT stands for luxury vinyl tile, and LVP is luxury vinyl plank. But at the end of the day, they're pretty much the same material, PVC and plasticizers. The real difference is the shape LVT is made to look like tiles, and LVP, well, planks.
So it all boils down to the look the customer wants. Tile or plank. Simple as that.
Exactly. Though there is one more term we should throw in there.
Yeah.
Rigid core LVT.
Oh, a rigid core. Now we're getting into the heavy-duty stuff.
Right. Basically, rigid core LVT has an extra structural layer. Makes it super durable, really stable.
Like LVT on steroids, right?
Something like that. It's great at resisting dents, impacts, you name it. Plus, it's got that built-in sound dampening, perfect for folks who want a quieter floor. And if I'm not mistaken, rigid core is the way to go for floating installations, right?
It is. That added stability makes it perfect for floating over existing subfloors.
Makes sense. And if you guys want to see how this all comes together, head over to Craig's YouTube channel, Tile the World. You can see the LVT magic in action.
Always a good time over there.
All right, so now that we've got the basics out of the way, let's get down to the nitty-gritty, the construction of LVT. This is where things get really interesting, especially for you salespeople and designers out there.
Absolutely. Knowing how LVT is built, knowing what goes into it, that's key for explaining its benefits to customers. And it helps you guide them to the right product for their needs.
So break it down for us. What are we looking at when we peel back the layers of LVT?
Okay, so at the bottom, you've got the base layer, usually made of PVC, gives the flooring its structure and stability. On top of that, you've got the print layer. This is what gives LVT its looks. The wood look, stone look, whatever the design might be.
Right, the part that makes it look so real.
Mm.
I've honestly been fooled by LVT a few times.
It's incredible, right? The technology they use is just amazing. And then protecting that print layer, you have the wear layer.
The wear layer. This sounds important.
It is. The wear layer is what takes the beating, the scratches, the spills, the everyday wear and tear. And the thickness of this layer, well, that makes all the difference in how durable the flooring is.
So thicker wear layer equals more durable floor.
Precisely. For high traffic areas like kitchens, entryways, living rooms, or in commercial spaces, you definitely want a thicker wear layer. But for rooms that don't see as much action, like a guest room or a home office, a thinner wear layer will do the trick.
And this is where your expertise comes in, right? As salespeople and designers, you're not just selling a floor, you're figuring out what the customer needs, making sure they get the right level of durability.
Absolutely. It's finding that sweet spot between performance and budget.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about installation. We all know LVT is DIY friendly, generally speaking, but are there any critical things that can make or break an LVT installation?
Oh, 100%. You can have the best LVT in the world, but if it's not installed right, it's going to cause problems. That's where you see planks separating, floors tenting or buckling, all those headaches.
So what's the biggest culprit when it comes to these installation nightmares?
9 times out of 10, it's a poorly prepped subfloor. The surface has got to be smooth, flat, level, you name it. If there are imperfections in the subfloor, they're going to show through, and that can lead to all sorts of issues, even damage to the LVT itself.
So we're talking more than just a quick sweep and mop, right?
Oh yeah, way more. Think scraping, patching, filling in any gaps or cracks. You might even need self-leveling compound to get things perfectly smooth.
You're speaking from experience here, right? Didn't you have to do a whole subfloor overhaul in your bedroom?
I did, and it was a project, believe me, but so worth it in the end. My LVT floor looks amazing, and it's all thanks to that rock-solid foundation.
All right, so subfloor prep, check. What other installation essentials should we be drilling into our customers' heads?
Acclimation. This one's huge. You can't just bring LVT straight from a freezing delivery truck into a warm house and expect it to behave. It's got to acclimate.
Right. That's where your don't shock the LVT analogy comes in.
Exactly. Sudden temperature changes can do a number on this stuff. So let it hang out in the room where it's going to be installed for 24 to 48 hours. Let it adjust to the temperature, the humidity, all that.
So basically, those boxes of LVT need to become part of the family for a couple of days.
Exactly. Give it time to chill, and you'll be rewarded with a nice, smooth installation. No drama.
Okay, acclimation, check. What else? What else do we need to watch out for?
Expansion gaps. These are so important, but people forget about them all the time. LVT, it expands and contracts with temperature changes, right? So you got to leave a little space around the edges of the room to let it do its thing.
So we're talking about leaving a small gap between the LVT and the walls.
Yep, exactly. The size of the gap depends on the specific product, so always check the manufacturer's instructions.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And for all our design-savvy listeners out there, how do we make these gaps look a little less, well, gappy?
Great question. You've got options. Baseboards, quarter-round molding, shoe molding, these can all hide those gaps while still giving the LVT room to breathe.
So it's about choosing the right trim, making sure it all looks cohesive.
Exactly.
Man, this is gold. I'm feeling like I could install LVT myself after this.
I'm happy to share the knowledge.
All right, we've got subfloor prep, we've got acclimation, we've got expansion gaps. Anything else we need to hit on installation-wise before we move on?
I think those are the big three. Just remember, preparation is everything. Take the time to do it right, and you'll be golden. A beautiful LVT floor, no problems.
Solid advice. All right, let's switch gears a bit and talk about troubleshooting. This one's for all the customer service superheroes out there, the folks on the front lines dealing with the issues when they pop up. What are some of the most common problems we see with LVT?
Well, two of the big ones are planks separating, and then what we call tenting or buckling.
Okay, yeah, those sound like the kind of problems that make customers see red.
They can, for sure. And a lot of times they come back to those installation mistakes we were just talking about.
Right, makes sense. So let's pull up our trusty LVT training document here. It's got a whole section on troubleshooting. Lots of questions in here.
Yeah, and those questions are there for a reason. They help you figure out what's really going on, what the root of the problem is, like when did the customer get the LVT? When did they install it? Where was it stored before installation? Was the subfloor prepped correctly? Did they leave expansion gaps? All those details.
Wow, that's a lot to keep track of. But I'm starting to see how crucial it is to get all that info.
Absolutely. The more you know, the better you can help the customer.
Okay, so let's say I'm a customer calling in and my LVT planks are separating. How would you use those troubleshooting questions to help me?
All right, first things first, I'd want to know when you got the LVT, when you installed it, and when you first noticed the separation.
Okay, let's say I got it about a month ago, installed it 2 weeks ago, and I just noticed the separation yesterday.
Got it. And where was the LVT stored before you installed it?
It was in my garage,
Okay. And what room is the flooring in?
my living room.
Got it. Did you happen to check how level your subfloor was before you installed the LVT? Did you take any measurements?
Well, I ran a level over it real quick. Seemed pretty flat to me.
Can you tell me a bit more about the measurements? Were there any spots that were off by more than, say, 1/8 of an inch?
Now that you mention it, there might have been a spot or two by the doorway that dipped a little.
Okay, good to know. And did you leave any space around the edges of the room? Between the LVT and the walls?
You mean like a gap? Nah, I didn't. I wanted it to look nice and flush against the walls.
I hear ya, but those expansion gaps are really important. Without them, the LVT can't expand and contract naturally, and that's what can cause those planks to separate.
Wow, I had no idea.
Don't worry, it happens. But now we've got a couple of possible explanations for why those planks are separating those dips in the subfloor and the lack of expansion gaps.
Wow, this is amazing. I can already see how asking these questions helps you zero in on the problem.
It's all about connecting the dots.
Okay, so what happens next? What can I do to fix this?
Well, the next step is to get some photos from you. Photos of the installation, the subfloor, and the areas where those planks are separating.
Photos. Why are those so important?
Photos give us a much better idea of what's going on. They can either confirm what we think is happening with the subfloor and those gaps, Or they might show us something else we haven't even considered.
Right, okay, so I take some photos, send them over, and then what?
Once we have those photos and all the info we've talked about, we can take a look and figure out the best way to move forward. We might be able to give you some tips on how to fix it yourself, or if it's a bigger issue, we might recommend having a pro come in and take a look.
This has been so helpful. I feel like I just learned a ton about LVT troubleshooting just from that one example.
Like I said, it's all about asking the right questions. It's like detective work.
I like that. Speaking of detective work, looks like we're out of time for this segment of the deep dive.
But don't worry, we'll be back to solve more LVT mysteries in part 2. Welcome back to the deep dive, everyone.
We're really getting into it now, folks, talking all things LVT and how to be the ultimate LVT gurus for your customers.
That's right. We left off talking about those photos customers can send in and how helpful those can be for customer service.
We did. And it's crazy how much you can actually tell from a few pictures. It's like you're right there with them, checking out the installation firsthand.
It's true. You can spot things the customer might not even notice, like how the LVT meets up with other types of flooring, or maybe they missed some gaps or bumps in the subfloor during prep.
So let's say we've got those photos, and it's clear the subfloor wasn't prepped correctly. What are our options then? Can we fix it?
It depends, really. If it's a minor issue, maybe we can guide them through some DIY fixes, like filling in small gaps, using shims to even things out.
But what if it's a bigger problem? Like the whole subfloor is way off level, or there are big cracks that were never addressed.
Yeah, in those cases, it might be time to call in a professional. Someone who can assess the situation and maybe even redo the subfloor prep. It's not ideal, but it's better than having those problems keep coming back.
Right, definitely. Sometimes you got to take a step back to move forward. It's all about setting the customer up for success in the long run, even if it means a little extra work up front.
Exactly. So now let's move on to another common issue we see, tenting or buckling. This is where the LVT planks start lifting or warping, making the floor all uneven.
Okay, yeah, that sounds a little more intense than plank separating.
Sure.
What causes that to happen?
Often it's the same culprits as plank separating. Those subfloor issues, problems with expansion and contraction, maybe even moisture. But with tenting and buckling, it can take a bit more digging to figure out what's really going on.
So back to those trusty troubleshooting questions.
You got it. And on top of the ones we talked about earlier, we might ask things like, what tools were used to connect the locking system? Were any heavy objects rolled across the floor after installation? Was it installed in a really big space? Did they use transition strips? All those details.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot to consider. It's like you're putting together a whole profile for the LVT installation, trying to understand its personality.
Kind of. Every little piece of information can help us crack the code.
All right, so let's say I'm a customer service rep, and I'm talking to a customer who's got some tenting going on. Walk me through how you'd use those extra questions to figure out what's happening.
Sure. So once we've gotten the basics down, when it was received, installed, all that, I'd start by asking about the installation process itself. What tools did they use for the locking system?
Okay, let's say they used a rubber mallet to tap the planks into place.
Got it. And after the flooring was installed, did they roll any heavy objects across it? Like appliances or furniture?
Good question. Let's say they did. They rolled their fridge across the newly installed floor to put it back in place.
Bingo! That could be our culprit right there. Rolling something heavy over LVT, especially right after it's been installed, can put a ton of stress on those locking systems, and that can definitely lead to tenting or buckling.
Wow, I never would have thought of that. It seems like such a small thing.
It does, but it's a common mistake, and it can make a huge difference in how stable the LVT is.
So even though LVT is super durable, it's not totally invincible.
Exactly. Got to treat it with a little TLC, especially during and right after installation.
Right. Okay, so we've got a potential suspect, the rogue refrigerator. What other questions would you ask to get a clearer picture of what's going on?
I'd want to know the size of the room. Big open spaces, they tend to have more issues with expansion and contraction, which can lead to tenting and buckling.
Okay, let's say it's a pretty big living room, like 20 feet by 30 feet.
All right, that's helpful. And did they happen to use any transition strips for expansion joints?
Transition strips, what are those?
They're basically like bridges between different types of flooring. Or you can use them to separate large areas of flooring to give those areas room to expand and contract. They help to relieve stress and prevent buckling or tenting.
Oh, interesting. So if they had used transition strips, it might have prevented the tenting in this case.
It's possible. They can really make a difference, especially in big areas and places with drastic temperature changes.
Makes sense. So in this case, no transition strips were used.
All right. And one more important question. How did they secure the edges of the LVT where it meets up with other flooring? Like, was it installed right next to a tile backsplash?
I don't quite see how that's relevant.
Well, think about it. Let's say that LVT in the kitchen goes right up to a tile backsplash. If it's butted up too tight, it might not have enough space to expand and contract freely.
Oh, got it. So it's kind of trapped, and that can cause it to buckle or tend?
Exactly. It needs room to breathe.
This is fascinating. I'm learning so much. It's like every little detail matters when it comes to LVT.
You're telling me. And the more we know, the better we can help our customers get those beautiful, long-lasting LVT floors they're dreaming of.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground on LVT troubleshooting today. This has been super helpful.
Definitely. But there's always more to learn.
That's what I love about this stuff. Always something new to discover. And speaking of discoveries, I have a feeling our LVT adventure isn't over yet.
You know me too well. We'll be back with more LVT insights and advice in part 3.
Welcome back to Tile the World. You know, you're official tile nerds now after all this LVT talk.
That's right. Back for round 3 of our LVT Deep Dive.
And man, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? Everything from what LVT is, how it's made, all those installation quirks, and then all that intense troubleshooting stuff.
We really have. But before we wrap things up, I think it's a good idea to recap some of the key takeaways. You know, stuff our listeners can actually use day to day.
Okay, hit me with it. What's the most important thing for salespeople, designers, and customer service folks to remember about LVT? What's the golden rule?
I'd say knowledge is power. The more you know about LVT, the better. How it's made, how to install it properly, how to troubleshoot those tricky situations. That knowledge will make you a true LVT expert, someone customers can really trust.
Couldn't agree more. We talked about the different types of LVT, what those wear layers are all about, how to prep the subfloor like a pro, acclimation, expansion gaps.
Right. And let's not forget those troubleshooting questions, asking the right questions, getting all those details. That's how you figure out what's going on and find a solution that actually works.
That's like being an LVT detective.
Exactly. A little detective work goes a long way. Prevents a lot of headaches down the road for everyone involved.
Speaking of headaches, are there any LVT myths or misconceptions floating around out there that we should address? Things people often get wrong.
Oh yeah, there are a few. Like, people think LVT is completely waterproof. And while it's pretty darn good at resisting water, it's not 100% waterproof.
So we still need to be careful with spills and standing water. Right.
Absolutely. Especially around those seams and edges, that's where moisture can sneak in.
Okay, good to know. What about the whole LVT being slippery thing? Is there any truth to that?
Well, yeah, like any smooth floor, LVT can get slippery if it gets wet. But there are options out there with textured surfaces which can help with grip.
So it's all about picking the right product for the space, the environment.
Exactly. And when in doubt, you can always suggest those non-slip area rugs, especially in areas where things tend to get wet.
Smart thinking. Any other LVT myths we should be busting?
One more that comes up a lot is that LVT is only for homes. And yeah, it's really popular in residential settings, but it's also becoming more and more common in commercial spaces.
That makes sense. I mean, it's durable, it's affordable, it's easy to maintain. Sounds like a win-win for businesses.
Exactly. And they even make LVT specifically for commercial use, with thicker wear layers and all those bells and whistles to handle the extra traffic and wear and tear.
So if a customer wants LVT for their business, we can confidently guide them through the options.
Absolutely. Figure out their needs, find a product that fits their space and how they use it, and they'll be good to go.
Well, I think we've officially explored every nook and cranny of the LVT world in this deep dive. I'm feeling pretty confident about my LVT knowledge now, that's for sure.
That's what we like to hear. And hey, if you ever need a refresher or you want to dive even deeper into some more advanced LVT stuff, there are tons of resources out there.
Speaking of resources, where should our listeners go to continue their LVT education?
Well, you know, I got to plug my YouTube channel, Tile the World. It's a great visual resource, lots of step-by-step videos on everything from prepping the subfloor to laying down that final plank.
And for those who are all about that tile eye candy, your Instagram Tile Nerd Army is the place to be.
Lots of tile inspiration over there for sure. And of course, you can't forget tilebar.com for all your tile needs. We've got a fantastic selection of LVT to choose from.
Awesome. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode of Tile the World. We hope you found this LVT deep dive helpful, and we hope we've officially turned you into LVT masters. Be sure to check out Craig's YouTube channel, Tile the World, for more great content. And if you're looking for tile inspiration or need to connect with a community of tile enthusiasts, head over to Craig's Instagram page, Tile Nerd Army. And don't forget, you can shop all your favorite tile, including a huge selection of LVT, at tilebar.com/ka.